Hi everyone and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel Rightside Blonde. I'm very excited about today's episode because it's episode 107 coming out on the 17th on a Friday of all days. You really can't make this stuff up. But I thought for today's episode, instead of going into the issues and talking about different stories from the past, I would have a special guest on today to discuss George Magazine. And I've had this guest on before, asked him some questions about George Magazine in the past, but I have a few more questions now that I've done some more research about the magazine. So I'm very happy to bring this person in to talk about George Magazine. So let's see who the special guest is for this week. You all can see who my mystery guest is here, and who better to have with me on the 107th episode of the George Collection, coming out on the 17th on a Friday. Okay, it's got to be this guy, Juan O Savin. And he so happens to know about George Magazine. He owns them all. I think one of the last times we spoke, Juan, you mentioned you had notes on the magazine. So I'm so excited to have you here. I want to say thank you so much before we even get started for all of the stuff you've taught us through the years, because I think most of us have jobs, we have children, we don't stop and think about these things. Where else would we hear this information? So I think 2020 was truly a gift, to stop and take a break and look at why are we doing what we're doing? Why do our kids go to this school? Why do I go to work 9 to 5? Why are we taking our kids to sports all weekend? We never have any time with our families. So it really was a great time to pause and really start paying attention to other voices other than the mainstream media. And you have been a voice of reason for me with history, especially with the numbers, Gematria, stuff like that. I had no knowledge of that prior to this. The numbers kind of, I don't know how else to say it, like organically just started showing up and started presenting themselves in my life. And it's kind of a weird woo-woo kind of thing to say. And I know that I'm from the Midwest, so these things are kind of woo-woo, but I just wanted to say thank you for helping us understand and make sense of those things, because they're just not things that you can find anywhere. So thank you.
You know, I can't claim any, credit for having, pulled this out of nowhere. This is, you just have to understand the language behind the scenes, politically, between countries and within these clubs. And so when I talk about that, um, I'm just relating to you a language that a lot of the people in positions of power and authority, whether you're talking the political world, the corporate world, the financial world, what they use to communicate. Um, and having been schooled in a lot of that from a very early age, it's more natural to me because it's like, I'm in Japan today, and I've been here in Asia for the last several weeks, doing a bit of um, I don't want to say cleanup because we can't clean it up, but reconnecting on some of the stuff we did back when we took down the Soviet Union and used the Asian markets and the yen to do our financial operations. And the people that I dealt with at a much earlier age, and then during those operations, there were certain protocols that had to be followed in communicating via numbers with other people and other groups. And so one of the things I've noticed, Jen, my wife, she speaks pretty good Chinese. She went over as a exchange student to Korea, and then to Singapore, a little bit of time in Japan, and then some time in China. And so she learned the language pretty well. She speaks it pretty fluently, but it's because she learned it, in her late teens, early 20s, and was immersed long enough that it actually caught. And then being back here, it's kind of coming back to her now, where she had, probably lost it for quite a while. It was, it's back into some kind of functional use. When you learn the language of numbers, which is this hidden language, think about in the Bible, where you had the Tower of Babel, and then the languages of all the people, the communications of the people were confused because God looked down. He saw what they were doing. They were actually involved in a space program, which is bizarre to most people when I say it that way, but they were building a tower to the heavens. It was actually a learning center. And if you think about how far man has advanced technologically in, say, the last 300 years, going from horse and buggy and bows and arrows to gunpowder, uh, rockets, jets, highly complex computer operations. What is the key component in this that leapfrogged it even faster in our own lifetime? And that's computers. And what do computers do? They allow us to communicate with people all over the world using the language of numbers. And now even decoding, encrypting, and converting languages so I can talk into my phone in English and have it come out in any of 100 different languages to another person writes to me instantaneously nearly. And they hear my question in their own language pretty doggone accurately. And the computer has fixed that and how do computers run via numbers. So there's a certain genius to the communication via the numbers, a certain accuracy to it. And then there are little codes within the numbers that are used. 17 is a good example because most of your audience is probably familiar with the 17. Well, 17 is the 17th letter of the alphabet's Q. And so a lot of thoughts and concepts are encoded within that Q. For example, the 17th book of the Bible is Esther. Esther is about a flip, a reversal. It has a lot of rich meaning with the book of Esther in the Bible. The name of God isn't mentioned anywhere in the book of Esther directly, but encoded in the book of Esther. If you take the first letter of paragraphs in a row, it spells out God's name. There's a bunch of codes all through the book of Esther that a lot of the scholars say, that could only have come from a much higher power to make the words make sense, and then have this encrypted code that's like a hidden fingerprint of God right there all through the book. But the other thing that you have to keep in mind, both sides, the good guys and the bad guys, want to own those numbers. So 17 in the occult is the number of victory. It's a number that they use. We're the conquerors is the implication. In fact, if you go and you look at symbols and you know that symbols, numbers, the Gematria of the numbers, various different languages, just like there's lots of different number languages. There's about 30 different number languages, some more obvious and some very obscure that you have to understand who's using it and why they're using a particular language, and you don't confuse which numbers language you're using. They tie things to the astrology. So symbols, astrology, and numerology are this interconnected code system that they use. And they'll even take verses out of the Bible. So they'll use a specific verse that is a chapter and a number that has information in it that matches a particular message that is conveyed between partners. And so if you want a more complex thought, they'll give you a code that gives you a book and a chapter and a verse. And then you go look at that, and that's your message. and that's been very commonly in use for a very long time. In the victory side of it, in the occult, sealing a grave or a tomb or a dark spirit or entity that they want to keep, enchained for use at a later time, or somebody who's an enemy, sealing it with a Q has been in place for, at least 1,000 years of stuff that I've seen. And so when you look at President Kennedy's gravesite, you have the eternal flame, and then you have it sealed with a Q. Look at the sidewalk around the gravesite from overhead. It's to encapsulate and trap a spirit, a freedom spirit. In the occult, witches will draw a circle around themselves of protection, and they'll turn 3 times in the circle. They'll do certain spells for magnification, but they do it all inside the circle while they're calling dark spirits in. And if they were to step outside the circle of protection, these entities, literally hating humans and flesh as much as they do, would kill the witch or the warlock instantly. But they work deals with these demon spirits to do work in this world, with the understanding that in the next world, the spirit's their slave in this world. In the next world, they will be the slaves to the spirit. It's a lousy equation, but that's the kind of stuff they do. And they'll do things on the numbers. Like an example also is, to magnify a spell, you do some magical act 3 times, knock 3 times on the door, like they do to get into the parliamentary offices in England or other parliaments around the world. They will, do triple something. That's the maximum magnification of a spell. So with victory 17, from a dark occult side, what's the greatest magical magnification of 17 for victory purposes in the dark arts? 17 and 17 is 34, and 17 again is 51. What's the most powerful magical place in the continental US militarily? Area 51. You'll see it over and over and over again. Once you kind of know the code, the Pentagon, 5 is the number of death to enemies and defense. Why does the Pentagon have to be built with 5 sides to it? Because the symbology of a 5-sided building means death to enemies and defense. What do they do at the Pentagon? They deliver death to enemies and they do defense. You see it over and over. And once you kind of understand those codes, it just gets easier to see and decipher. The amount that they'll ascribe to a building project. For example, they had an intelligence gathering center for satellite stuff that was a building that nobody knew what the purpose was. Even congressmen are going, "What's that building going up here now? Anybody know what that's about?" And when they get to the project and look at it, the building has a cost to build of $191 million. Well, what's that code to everybody involved? That's a palindrome 19, the power number, and it was for a military operation. Another building, the cost on the building is slated to be $195 million. What's that? That's 19.5. Again, the power number with you're averaging out a critical number, which is 19.47. You draw a circle, and then you put a line at what would be the equator of a circle, and you draw a pyramid inside that, like we have for the fallout shelters, a circle with a pyramid in the middle of it. If you measure the distance, if it's 360 degrees around the circle, if you measure the distance between the equator and the tip of the point on the bottom side of either pyramid, It's 19.47 degrees exactly from the equator to the lower tip of that pyramid. Why is that important? Because that's the bleed out point for energy and the other physics, which aren't talked about in the normal physics operations or universities. And that's the power number. So 19.47, it's been known for a very, very, very long time. When did they use that in the politics here in America? 1947, you had the aliens at Roswell, which was a psyop. You had the creation of the CIA. You had the creation of the Air Force, which was plum-picked officers from other services to then be part of a new operation that was, in fact, at that time, had control of nuclear. And so those decisions based on the numbers happen all the time. And once you kind of realize that, if you're looking correctly, you can see where there's an insider hat trick. Everybody, back this up, don't get in our way, don't interrupt, this is us within the club. And they'll use numbers that convey that message. And if you understand what you're looking at even the ceiling of a tomb with a Q, we're locking in that power, that force, to keep it from getting loose and stopping it from affecting what we're doing otherwise. That's the attitude that goes on behind the scenes. And last thing I'll say on this, you get into the intelligence agencies and the work that they do. A huge part of working in the intelligence services is guys are always competing with each other with their latest magic act, their magic trick, their hat trick, the art of concealment, of deception, of diversion, because they can use it in the field and other stuff. So I remember very early on, guys that I would meet or come in contact with, be introduced to, they all had their little tricks of the trade that they like to, practice on the next, unwitting victim to see if you could catch how they did what they were doing and how good they were at it doing it. Kind of like one of the places that I used to like to frequent a lot was Magic Castle in North Hollywood out in California. And their magicians belong to the club, and then people can purchase membership, permanent or annual or whatever, and they come to the club and have dinner, hang out, and go to magic shows by these magicians that are honing their craft, their trade at magic in all different types of magic act. It's amazing, and a huge percentage of their membership are people from the clandestine world because they're learning the next trick. And guys will go there. I remember one of the guys that I was with years and years ago. He spent 3 months at Magic Castle practicing and learning his particular trick that he wanted to do before he went out in the field and worked in a particular country. And he had this one group of tricks that he wanted to be able to do perfectly. And he went to Magic Castle to do it. So a handful of the guys out there doing the magic acts might be your next spy. In fact, one of my favorite editions, you mentioned I have all of the George magazines, which I do. One of my favorite editions is, and my favorite year, by the way, for anybody that wonders, is 1997. Every edition that year was unique enough, and just the stars that they used, the cover people, the themes. I thought that was, but personally, it's just my favorite year. And I believe it was October, November of that year was the spy edition, and spy ops and intelligence agencies and all that. That was just one that was a little particularly fun for me. So,
Yeah.
and again, there they had the numbers all through it. It was part of the thing. Most people don't catch it, but there's little number stuff all through it. And I have some of the notes, guys having fun communicating. So you don't see it. It's imagery, and you got to really look and then go, oh shoot, that's funny. How did they even know that? Who thought to put
Hold
that one in
on.
there? Just fun.
Hold on. I'll pull it out for people to see because that's one of my favorite ones too. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right here. Um, this one is what he's talking about.
Yeah, there you go. It makes me laugh just to see it.
Um, one
I'm
there.
sorry, I droned on, but I thought,
Oh,
you mentioned numbers, and I do talk to so many people, and a lot of people may not know that
yeah.
little thing. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of something for them to chew on.
Yep. I think that's a good intro because with the George magazine, there's a lot of speculation about them. And there's one sequence. I know you said 97, but I really like 1999 because of what John Kennedy did. And I don't know if he meant to do it. I think he did, but we'll see, I guess. We know July of 1999 is when his plane went down. But earlier that year, we all know that Hillary Clinton was running for Senate and John was thinking about it. He had actually told people that. So it wasn't
Well, then
more
there's the Clinton
speculation.
interview, in that era too, by George magazine.
Right. So this one, okay, this is particular. First of all, look at the guy on the cover wearing a black hat. Um, but this one, why Hillary won't be senator. Okay, so picture you're John Kennedy. Your main opponent would be Hillary Clinton. You put on your political magazine in April 1999 of that year that your opponent won't be senator. And obviously, he can take a headline and change it to whatever it is. So the actual article is a little different than what the headline portrays. But on the cover of his magazine, he wrote, "Why Hillary won't be senator." It's just funny. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, um, that whole era. Let me back up a little bit before we get there to
Okay.
to couch that moment. Um, you had the Clinton presidency.
Mhm.
We're at the tail end of the Clinton presidency, so they're speculating and wanting to stay in a position of power because Bill's going to be out, and you have to understand these are political creatures. Their entire life is about getting to a power position and holding it and maintaining it. And then the reality is there was so much criminality behind the scenes getting to the presidency for the Clintons and then staying there. It just never ended the entire time they were there. Vince Foster and all the dramas around his death, the banking scandals, the time before Bill even got to the
Whitewater.
presidency, Bill Governor with all the money laundering, whatever. Let me divert for just a second or two. Remember two things. Number one, Bill Clinton was not born to Blythe. Bill Clinton, his mom, the father was Winthrop Rockefeller, and they're in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and uh, a governor of Arkansas. Um, that's why Bill, the supposed dad, Blythe, was a low-ranking military person who rolled his car over in a ditch and drowned in a few inches of water. It was very tragic. But at the time that Bill's mom found out she was pregnant, for convenience, they picked somebody that, couldn't say he wasn't the dad. She supposedly went out on one date with him, which nobody else remembers. And in a time when people weren't quite that frisky, supposedly on the first date went out and had sex and she got pregnant. And all of that a story. In fact, if you look at Bill when he was inaugurated on inauguration night in 1993, January 20th, he gave credit and homage to Carol Quigley, who had wrote a long tome of a book. I can't think of the name of it right off the top of my head. But what the core of the book is all about is this hidden cabal who have been reigning and ruling through history from behind the curtain, and how they keep track of everything, including the bloodlines of all the children, including those that are the bastard children, if you will, and so that they can help and promote their kids, even though they may not be publicly known or acknowledged within their bloodlines and their families. And so Bill said that Carol Quigley is the one that he credited with teaching him what he needed to know in order for him to rise to the presidency of the United States. And then look at the book, Tragedy and Hope.
I just was going to say, I think
Yeah.
it's Tragedy and Hope.
And it's this long, boring book. What's the key to the book? It'd be like reading, one of the Old Testament things. And so begot so begot so begot so. And you're like, I want to read this to the kids. It'll be entertaining. No, you'll drive them crazy. It's just for scholars. And Quigley himself said he was invited to see the records and understand it, but not because it was really for the public. It was for this little cabal, because they're so arrogant, they're so proud of themselves that they want to preserve stuff in plain sight so that later generations can look back on it and then say, see, we were right there the whole time, hidden in plain sight. And it's just it's part of their magical hat trick that they want to do. And so Bill is giving homage to the fact that here he is, this hidden bloodline member of one of the cabal families, in this case, the Rockefellers, and he's able to come into power. Nobody realizes it. Nobody understands the trick, and he gets to have the benefit of all the power within the family on their behalf as the bastard kid. And part of the rest of the story is Rocky, his uncle, had not been able to get to the presidency, even though he ran, he tried. There was all some sorts of drama in the background during Nixon to try and get there through Watergate, stuff like that. And he could not, the American people wouldn't do it. Nixon said, if that bastard, I will not resign if that bastard's somehow going to get to the presidency. And they had to work a little deal so that he couldn't go there, and he couldn't get there with the people voting him in. So they gave America the bastard instead. That's the language that they use amongst themselves. I'm not saying that because I actually have, just as an aside before we get to Hillary, I actually have a certain level of respect for Bill Clinton. He could read a balance sheet and understand it better than just about any president in the last probably 60, 70 years. He was a master at being able to change persona to do the personality presentation changes in an instant, and fit the crowd or audience that he was with. He'd ride with some of the people that were in his protective detail. In fact, the head of it, Larry Patterson, was a very, very good friend. And, Clinton would get in the car after he'd done some little speech or presentation, and he'd brag with Larry. Boy, I put it to him this time, man. I had him wrapped around my little finger. I could have gone anywhere I wanted. Did you see that babe there in the third row? Whoa! That was the way he, dealt with it.
I just picture his crying face when he went out, and said his infamous line.
Well, when Brown died in the plane crash, and he suddenly realized that there was cameras on him, and he went from laughing and joking to a tear in literally like 2 seconds.
Wow.
And completely changed up instantly. And of course, with Brown, we had pretty good data that he didn't die in the plane crash. He was in the very back of the 737 doinking a gal that was the stewardess. When the plane crashed, they had put in a fake transmitter mimicking a particular flight path that the plane could fly through these mountains to its destination, and flew it right into a mountaintop. And when that happened, the way it hit, everybody in the forward part of the plane was killed, but in the very rear of the plane where there was a bed and he's doinking the stewardess, they survived. And the allegation is that the stewardess was actually virtually uninjured, and they were transporting her in the ambulance, and she had seen when they found Brown in the aircraft, and they shot him right through the top of the head. And then they killed her in the ambulance on the way to a hospital in the area. When Brown's body was brought into the U.S. And at Andrews and was examined, there was a X-ray that was handed around to a couple of the folks at the time, and look at this. What do you think of this? What do you think of this? Well, the X-ray showed all of the bullet fragments in his brain and where it had entered through the top of the head. And that was the context, and there was all this drama behind the scenes. It's like when Vince Foster's body was found, you had blood that flowed uphill, supposedly, based on how his body was lying, and it obviously clearly had been moved. Well, later you had G. Gordon Liddy had a person that came on the show. The guy was very vetted before he ever got in the show, and he had been the person to actually find Vince Foster's body there at the park just down the street from the entrance to the CIA. And he had pulled there to go out and take it because he had to go to the bathroom and there was no place to do it nearby. So he just pulled in the park. He walked over to the edge of the bushes where he thought nobody would be around. There was 2 cars in the parking lot when he pulled in, I believe a van and then Vince Foster's car. And he went over to take a leak, and there's Vince Foster's body. And when he saw the body, his glasses were still on, and then his body was in a certain position. And he spent a minute or two looking at it and seeing what was going on. Then he went back to his car, felt threatened by these 2 men that were in the parking lot by the van, got in his car and left, and didn't say anything about the fact he saw it. He was afraid for his life. And then later came out with G. Gordon and told the whole story. And then you had the ambulance driver who had picked up the body and noted that his throat, just under the jawline near the ear, had a round hole that he interpreted as a gunshot. Well, when Foster's body was examined, they never supposedly found the bullet, which had supposedly gone out the back of his head. He'd shot himself through his open mouth, allegedly. But when they were supposed to do the autopsy the next morning, and they had it scheduled with Park Police detectives to be there to watch the autopsy technician, surgeon, had started an hour before they got there, and he had already cut his throat from ear to ear, supposedly looking for bullet fragments or whatever, and removed his tongue and put it on a tray beside his head. And the other detectives were just aghast because they were coming to watch the autopsy. So supposedly nobody was there to observe the autopsy. And in that time frame, one of the people involved had a picture that was shown a number of times around DC at the time. And it was a message to anybody that wanted to talk. Have you seen this picture? And it was a picture of Vince Foster's tongue in a tray sitting next to his head. Well, in certain of clubs within the ritual, if you would talk, your tongue should be cut out of your head. And there's this tongue cut out and set in the tray, but also conveniently, it then destroyed the spot where the ambulance driver said was the bullet hole going into the head, which means that Vince Foster, instead of shooting himself through the mouth, the bullet going out through the back of the head, had been shot up through the chin in a different trajectory, and you know, not fitting even that part of the story. So, and back by the ear of the jawline. So lots of little things, and of course, you never find that stuff if you're looking for it. Why? Because they're using it for private communications. You could manufacture a picture showing something like that, and unless you have time to look at the negative and do all the examination, you wouldn't be able to put otherwise. But it did get the message to the people that were, you know, being conveyed a message. Do you really want to talk? Could this be you?
It reminds me of
Um,
Kate Spade, what Kate Spade's husband did after her her hanging. Do you remember
mhm.
that? He wore this mask, this odd-looking mask, and
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, the symbology, and there's so many things going on, and then you're really dealing with cults. Washington D.C., the entire city is built around occult themes. Occult just means hidden, um, and so occult, not just the word cult, but occult. So when you occult something, it's hidden, uh, generally right in plain sight. So when you look at Washington, D.C., it's angles, it's alignments, it's numerology within the architecture. And at the center of the whole city is the obelisk. And it's tied to their religion, which is the religion of Osiris.
Mhm.
Um, and the Osiris myth, which I've talked about many times before. The entire city is built around that center point, but the center point didn't exist as the city was being built. It was added once the features around it were in place. And then, for example, um, uh, certain of the presidents would do their um, presentation about something with the financing or something with the court, something with the Congress or the legislature. And if you looked at the time of day, it would have the shadow of the Washington Monument cast on that building right when they're doing the news conference. When Obama was sworn in, if you remember, there was the flub in the way that he said the oath. So they had to retake the oath, and just to be certain. So they had Roberts come over to the White House and swear in Obama, and they did it in the map room. So the official pictures, you see where Obama is doing the oath. He's got his hand on the book, allegedly the Quran, not the Bible, his hand on the book, and you see where his eyes are looking, but they're not looking at Justice Roberts. They're looking past Justice Roberts out the window of the map room. Well, what's out the window of the map room? The Washington Monument. So they do all these things, these rituals, right in plain sight. And to most people, they don't catch the nuances, the minutia of the way those rituals are done. So now you have the Obama or the Clintons. They're extremely tied into the myths, the numerology, the symbology. Hillary had the White House Christmas tree decorated in all sorts of bizarre uh, sex gods and goddesses and cultish things and condoms and all sorts of things, because they have to disgrace what was there, the meaning of Christmas, etc. They are very much into these occultish things. In fact, when they went on their wedding, um, for their honeymoon, where did they go? Clinton talks about the fact they went to Haiti. of all things. And there they watched the witch doctors doing their acts. Later in life, we find out Hillary is a member of the Wing Coven. She would sneak away when Bill was president and go out to meetings of the Wing Coven in California with the Hollywood people, because she's a card-carrying witch, and which is hard for most people to get their minds around. As they got to the end of the Clinton presidency, the idea of being out of power was very dangerous to them, because then their enemies could trample over them. They could, decide to, turn over on them for the crimes that the Clintons were involved in, because they're out of power. They're no longer matter. They give them up and climb over their dead bodies. So the Clintons couldn't afford to allow that to happen. So the plan was to take the Senate seat in New York as a carpetbagger, as Jay Rockefeller steps down, and Hillary's going to run for the seat. And that was the plan, so that she could remain in power in order to protect them and be in a position to protect them. And anything that would come in the way had to be stopped. Well, in that same time frame, of course, that's all of the questions around the plane crash. And then even up till now, by the way, taunting the Clintons, "We're coming for you," taunting them, "We know what you wanted to do what you were planning." And how does Trump taunt? When you go into Mar-a-Lago, as you go through reception, what do you see right there in the main room next to the card room? What do you see as you walk in? First thing you see is the proposed new paint scheme for Air Force One, which ended up being Trump Force One, new paint scheme. But it's the 747 with the black and red and white, which was the same colors as Junior's plane had at the time of the crash. And it's a little bit of trolling. It's an inside. We're watching. Just watch what happens next. It's trolling at a different level, and sending little messages back and forth. Where'd that come from? It was in the White House. Trump made a big deal out of Barron looking at the plane right there in the Oval Office when it was delivered, and then everybody asking about, what's this? Well, it's the new Air Force One paint scheme. That's what we're thinking about changing it to. And by the way, who was the last group to change the paint scheme on Air Force One? Well, that goes back to the Kennedy administration and to Jackie's heading the committee that went through and picked the new paint scheme, and including the blue that's used on the bottom side of the paint scheme for Air Force One. That blue is called Tiffany blue. It's a very specific blue. It's a blue that Jackie had formulated precisely, exactly for the belly of Air Force One, the lower portions, with the gold and the very artsy paint scheme. Well, again, in the course of trolling, Trump uses symbology. He uses the language of numbers. He likes to use their own stuff against them. So what does Trump do? In his secret language codes, which also include numbers, by the way, but his primary was the language of flag, the language of semaphore. So where was he flying these flags that had secret messages for the fleet? Semaphore is the language of flags ship to ship. Before we had transmitters and radios, things like that, ships used flags to communicate between each other. And in a military situation, say you wanted to commit or to communicate with just a single ship. You would run the flag of that ship and then the message for it. And then maybe you had a message for a different ship that was with you, and you'd run the flag of that ship up the pole and the communicated message in flag language to that ship. What if it was to all the ships? You'd run a different flag for all the ships. But between these, how do you know what's intended? Well, you'd run a gap. So you'd have a blank or you'd have a black flag that would say end of message, begin new message, so that the ships wouldn't be confused who was being signaled and what the message was they were supposed to pay attention to. It's an interesting thing that Trump, in flying those flags, did he fly them at Mar-a-Lago? Did he fly them at the White House? Did he fly them over at the Pentagon to communicate with all the world leader to American people covertly, so that down the road in history you could come back and understand that things that he did intelligently by design, even though it may have looked as obscure at the time. He couldn't trust people to get it right out around him. So he had Melania as the flagstaff. Every dress Melania wore from day one, January 20th, 2017, at the inauguration, as Trump became president, the very first message sent out to the world was the dress. And what color was the dress that Melania wore? Tiffany blue. What color were the boxes that were presented to the Obamas, Michael and Barry, at the White House front porch? Tiffany blue boxes. What was the message? That which was taken away from America, that was removed from the White House through fraud and criminality, through evil, we're here to take it back. And they wore the one thing that couldn't be confused with anything anybody else was doing. The First Lady wearing Tiffany blue, harking back to that prior administration where everything went off the rails. We're here to set it right. Trump with the paint scheme from Junior's aircraft, right there in the Oval Office with his son playing with the plane. To hearken back, we're here to take back what was stolen. And even in some of the other operations that took place during this time period, think about it. How long had Trump thought about, because every president has it, they all know the protocol. And by the way, where did Trump even learn the intricacies, the nuances of what it meant to be president, what it meant to be part of the club, all of the inner workings? Who taught him that? Bill Clinton had Carol Quigley, and he had, his real dad, and he had others around him that were tutoring him. But Carol Quigley was one that tutored Clinton, and he gave him credit. Who was it that tutored Trump? It was Nixon. Nixon told him what was going on. Nixon, who'd been taken out by the very same people who've been a nuisance to Trump the whole way through, with these secret hidden families. It was a Rockefeller operation to take Nixon out of Whitewater or Watergate.
Mhm.
And plenty of the people knew that. Nixon's the one that was the message. He made Trump his message in the bottle moving forward. And he gave him all the nuances and all the things he should do. Of course, Nixon was a Navy man,
Mhm.
and having his own language, the language of flags, the people that were tied to that going further back, that was MacArthur in an earlier era prior to Kennedy being taken out, and the work they were doing to come against the Rockefeller clan here in America and the groups associated with them, CFR and those types of things, with what they were doing with the United Nations, the creation of the United Nations. in the aftermath of World War II. The work to create a policing agency out of UN using the North-South Korea conflict. And when MacArthur violated the protocols with what they were trying to build, they had to take MacArthur out. Where did a lot of these intelligence operations that went up through where Eisenhower and MacArthur, who didn't really get along, had an agreement, and MacArthur would take the covert side, Eisenhower took the overt, because they both realized they were still fighting the Nazis. Operation High Jump, the various people involved. They hadn't got them all the way, and some of them had gotten into power, including in our military. So how are they going to work to get that under control while the other side was hiding in plain sight, and they had to hide their operations in plain sight to try and recapture control, even when Kennedy was taken out? This has been a much longer game than most people realize. And the preparations, even for this moment, remember, Trump said he was invited to run. Who invited him? 200 generals and a handful of admirals. With him being invited to run, did they have a plan? How long had the plan been in place? What were they trying to do? Had there been other attempts to recapture control of the helm of the ship? Because we are a hijacked, captured operation as a country. Who did that? What was their plan? Did they have a plan when they invited Trump to run? Is he in charge of everything, or has he been invited in? Who made the introduction? Goes back to Nixon.
Speaking of
in
Nixon,
this latest iteration.
John put Nixon on the first anniversary issue. I shout out to Jeff Johnson who sent me this. So thank you, Jeff. Before I knew Nixon's role in all this, I was like, why would he put Nixon on there? Because we all, everyone has like a terrible mentality of him because of what they've done to him with Watergate. Do you think that John put him on the first cover so that it would so people would look into it a little deeper? Why do you think he would choose
okay, let
Nixon?
me ask you a little different question.
Okay.
Whose idea and how did you come up with the name of George Magazine? Where did that come from?
There's a lot of speculation. I've had a lot of people ask me.
It was suggested by Trump.
Really?
Remember, Trump and Jr. were friends, not just
Wow.
slight friends, but very good friends. And what did Nixon believe? Nixon believed that before it was all over, that it was going to have to be something like what George Washington saw. Nixon was actually raised in a fairly religious household. They were Quakers. He didn't even really say his first cuss words till he got to the South Pacific. And the guys that knew him and worked around him, he was a very straight arrow guy. He didn't know how to play cards. You get in the service, you're around other guys, and you got to kind of work and blend in and like that. In some ways, he was actually like the radar of his era in the South Pacific because he was making sure supplies got to everybody. The planes went out with the right supplies for the right people. And he'd have to, if they had a need up in the lines up forward, he's at this intermediate location, make sure that the aircraft go out with the right cargo. And he was very resourceful. And then he even ran a little hamburger joint with supplies that they would kind of set aside and keep for those air crews that were flying up to the front, give them a little bit of relief so they'd be in there refueling and getting any maintenance or repairs before they went back to get more supplies there. They were an intermediate fueling stop there. And so Nixon opened his own little hamburger stand, and it was this little burger shack. I can't remember what they called it, but all the guys just thought that was the greatest thing, and he'd have an extra beer here and there, or pop. for the air crews so that they could, have a little refreshment before they continued on. And a lot of the money, guys there in that area would save some of their money and use that just for those crews, even out of their relatively meager incomes they made as officers. So, Nixon had a really cushy job as an attorney because he'd been to law school back in the States, but he requested and requested and requested to get to the war, and then they finally let him go ahead and go out in the South Pacific. And everybody that was with him spoke very highly of him during that time. He was a breath of fresh air in a very tough environment. And anyway, I get off, but Nixon he had some spiritual moments that occurred at different times. And one of the things that his brother had mentioned to me privately, because we were friends, at one point he said, he talked a lot about how he would have kind of spiritual thoughts or, almost visions. But George Washington wrote about the fact that he saw the future of America and that there was a point. He saw three things that were going to happen in the future. He saw the Revolutionary War with, England, the motherland, if you will, the homeland. He saw a later war where brother would be fighting against brother in a great civil war that would nearly divide and destroy the nation. And then Washington said he saw a later conflict that was like the second, with brother fighting against brother, and all the great cities in flames, save the countryside dwellings. And from that seed, the country would be reborn. In other words, he saw a civil war out in America's future that would be focused on the big city center complexes, and that it would be devastating enough that the country would have to be rebuilt after that, out in the countryside, and start over again. And the idea of civil war in America was something that Nixon realized that had been seen before. And so the question is, are we seeing an America that fits the vision of the founding fathers, and who more precisely understood that initial vision for America than George Washington? Because he represented all of the other founders by principle and ideals. He was a member of the Secret Handshake Club, as were most of the other founding fathers, but they had a vision for America, what it could and should be. And the question was, are you going to go back to foundations? And if you are, what's that foundation look like? What's a constitutional America, as envisioned by the writers of the Constitution, truly look like? And so you're going to go back to foundations and foundational principles. You should go back to the foundational ideals and idealists, starting with George Washington. And that's really what the magazine is all about, is these foundational principles. If you look at the way it was intended to capture its audience, it's an oversized magazine. It's a coffee table presentation. It's designed to catch your eye. So it has Hollywood stars, all of the early ones, and models, Cindy Crawford, one of my very favorites in that era. Just, and even now she's just a very beautiful person with her skin products and like that. But, think of that, you got you got De Niro on the cover. You got a lot of people that today, you think of what's going on today. In the current version, it's using patriot kind of people within those cover themes and the articles like that. in part because it costs you a fortune to get the Hollywood stars. And then the other thing is, think about it this way. Could George magazine of the 90s, would it be acceptable in Democrat circles today? If you take those copies from the 90s with the Hollywood celebrities on them, and then you tried to do the subject matter that you would want to do today. Imagine, let's put it this way, if Kennedy had not been assassinated, if President Kennedy had survived, would the Democratic Party have continued to go as far left as it is today? If the party went that far left, imagine at the time, Reagan. Reagan was a Democrat. He was, pretty influential Hollywood Democrat. He was the president of the Screen Actors Guild, and so he was, he represented, the union that's all the Hollywood actors. Reagan famously said, "I didn't leave the Democratic Party; they left me," and he became a Republican. He just couldn't, the ideology, the way they think, the things that they were doing, he could not, with clear conscience, be part of. President Kennedy probably would have had to have changed at some point down the road himself. So then you go within the family, even Robert, would he have, he would have tried to take the Democratic Party a different direction than they were going. He would have still been very liberal, but nothing like it is today. And those leaders may have held the party further to the center than they ended up going over time, in part because the people that got into power got there through fraud, got there through criminality, through criminal alliances. If you agree that Oswald didn't act alone and that Sirhan didn't do what he did by himself, if he did it at all, then the people who could pull off those mad acts and those illusions that then were able to take the reins of power, the party followed its leadership into those levels of criminality and fraud to become who they are today. And so the party has gone way away from, the people that were in power at that time. Had those people stayed there, they'd have probably kept the party closer to the center. Mondale talked about the fact that the party was going crazy, and he was as leftist as they get. And he was saying privately after he was out of power, I don't even recognize this thing. This is not something that I can really agree with. It's embarrassing. So with that in mind, now you look at where the party's at today and Hollywood today. Would the Hollywood of today had the magazine continued over this period of time, and with John's leadership editing, would he have been acceptable to them, having a person like Trump for a friend, using thoughts and ideas that go back to Nixon? One of the big articles that's their 25th anniversary of Watergate, looking at that and the history that was going on there. I would speculate that just as President Kennedy would have ended up going to the right and flipping like Reagan did over to the Republican Party, that John would have done that too, or gone to some independent, like his uncle has done now, not being able to run as the Democrat. Democrat Party doesn't want him. He's too centrist for them. He's still left of where we are on the Republican side, but he's he's not centrist enough. So then you kind of take a look at that and you go, well, what would George magazine look like today if John was still there running it? I think it would be considered a far right magazine today. And he would have ended up being a pariah to the very people who were on the covers in the 90s, because he would not have gone along with what they're doing.
Mhm.
He'd have seen the destruction that was coming from that. He wanted to go back to foundational principles, literally just as his uncle does right now. You listen to Robert Jr., and he says, wouldn't it be great if we had a Democrat who believed and wanted to defend the Constitution debating a Republican, Trump, who also believes and wants to defend constitutional principles? If you had those two men debating the course for America from a Democrat, Constitution loving side and a Republican, Constitution loving side, arguing to the center with Constitution as the center point for those debates. Today, the Democratic Party wants to change the Constitution. They want to, a lot of people want to have a constitutional convention, very dangerous idea, and alter it to fit the times. The reality is you look at it and you realize it's more relevant just the way it is right now than it's ever been, because they understood what, is at the core of making America work. And so that's what George magazine is really about: constitutional, historical perspectives, and trying to get some of those discussions past the censors, using a bit of flash, some fancy pictures with the famous stars, and a bit edgy of headlines that are baiting often to get people to crack the thing open and actually read something. And the other thing is, Reagan used to say it all the time: readers are leaders. So when you find people that actually have a clue what's going on in the world and what matters, they're usually readers. They read a lot. And that's both on the good and the bad side. The guys that read a lot, I'll use again Bill Clinton, a voracious reader. President Kennedy, a voracious reader. Reagan was also a voracious reader, but he didn't do it directly. Reagan had people that would scan all the relevant presentations, books, articles, and then give him a highly edited version so he got the key points. And they might actually give him, say, an entire book or a long article, but would have the highlights in it. And Reagan could go where those highlights were and they'd be underlined, and he could look through them for himself or just trust the editing. But that way he could get a lot more of people's thoughts and ideas there's only so many hours in the day, and still accomplish a lot of stuff he had to accomplish. So, I think if even anybody doing something current is trying to mimic the true original intent and origins, you have to just look at it from a constitutional basis. And the people you have, part of the reason for using the Hollywood celebrities is because people would then crack the magazine open. If you're using only patriot right celebrities, you've kind of missed the whole point. It fits a certain audience and guarantees you a certain audience, but it doesn't have the broader appeal, other than just the name and people remembering the history, that the original did. And I think, in defense of the folks over there, the cost to get some of these stars. They probably couldn't print enough magazines to pay some of those uh, uh, prices at today's wages, because they're just so far over the top.
Mhm.
So
People are very opinionated too about everything. I mean, it doesn't matter who it is. There's somebody that's going to say something bad, and maybe they're right too. It's just everything's kind of up in the air right now. It's the fog of war. I've heard that term. It feels like we're kind of, people really don't know what's up and what's down, and it's confusing.
well, this has all been gamed out pretty effectively long before Trump came on the scene. Um, people wonder if there's a plan. Well, people that invited Trump to run were working on a plan that had been gamed out really for several decades. There was a couple attempts to come in and address the captured aspect of America that were intercepted, and a lot of guys lost their life in at least one of those. And arguably, the things that President Kennedy intended to do to dismantle key aspects of the operations to hijack America, uh, both monetarily and in the intelligence agencies, were intercepted by taking out President Kennedy during Nixon. Nixon understood the exact same threat and dealing within the Navy community with the guys all the way back from MacArthur that had survived to that point. And that's why Nixon instituted the Houston Project. And in fact, the last courier that Nixon sent out after he'd made the decision to step down out of the White House was a courier that carried a message. It was the formula for getting power across the ground plane on the planet with Tesla's formula that allows you to get what amounts to, for all intents and purposes, free energy by charging the ground plane and putting a pulse to it. And what that formula looks like, he wrote it on the courier's skin on his waist, and then sent him to go deliver a message to Kissinger, which was then taken to the Rockefellers. And it was to David Rockefeller specifically, but it was sent to Kissinger. And because it was written from memory by Nixon, then Nixon had explained to the courier that he had hidden that in more than one place, including in the White House, and that if anything happened to him after he left the presidency, that he would release that code. And that wasn't just self-serving protection for Nixon. It was so that Nixon couldn't be stopped in doing what he was doing to oppose what was being done by these groups in the background. Nixon himself then reading Trump in to a certain level, giving him the tools needed to have a shot at taking out this cabal, and then the contacts. And then when the time came, getting formally given the invitation and him accepting it, knowing full well what the cost and the risks were, not just for himself, but his family. A level of bravery that, is hard to grasp for most people, because they look at this at too surface of a level. If you understand that what Trump has done is put his entire family on the line in this craps game, and his legacy of his family and the generations to come is all rolling on whether he and the generals behind him have in fact got a winning plan. And with them, all the rest of us. Does America survive where we're at? And what's that plan? How's that plan being played out? It was gamed out on computers. It was gamed out, 100,000 times before he got to Trump. And it was based on what if an alien race was to come to Earth, maybe just a handful of players, similar to what happened in the ancient times with the 200 that landed at Mount Hermon. These 200 giants, men of stature, that landed on Mount Hermon. And by the way, you think I'm just telling you a fairy tale? Well, the highest altitude World Heritage Site on planet Earth is Mount Hermon over there in the Mideast. And Mount Hermon's where these 200 fell to Earth. What's at the base of Mount Hermon? The city of Baal. What was this artifact at the city of Baal that was left over all these thousands of years, from 4,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago? It's the Arch of Baal that was preserved intact from the city. What was their theme? At Baal, they would sacrifice children for power or survival. They would bring their children to the Baal and make an offering to the 200. And of those 200, they were all male. In the lore, they were all male. And seeing that they were going to die and that would be the end of them, they chose for themselves women of whomever they wished and procreated with them. And so the children from those relationships were these men of stature and renown also, the wise men, the power players, if you will, Goliath and his family type of people. And so with this 200 then being able to take over the planet, were they the ones that were behind bringing everybody together at the Tower of Babel and trying to get the technology improved and increased? If you had 300 years of increasing technological advancements with some extra guidance, what's 300 years look like? 300 years ago, we were still buggies, didn't have trains yet, horses, just beginning to learn the powers of black powder, gunpowder. The saddle had just come into being 200 years earlier, and people were learning how to ride horses with a saddle, which gave you better control. From there, all the way up through rocketry and computers. If they had not been opposed at Babel and the languages all confused, we'd have had the space race, 5,000 years ago. What would the planet look like where everybody could communicate without any fetter? God, it said, looked at what the children of men were doing at the Tower of Babel and saw that nothing which they envisioned to do would be impossible to them. Anything that they could dream to do, they could actually bring to pass. That's how powerful the mind of man is. So God confused the languages so they couldn't share knowledge. And we stayed in the dark ages all this time with industrialization, division of labor, coming up with monetary mechanisms to spread and advance wealth by paper wealth and promises faster than you could extract metals. And then adding in the computer in the last, 100 years, 70 years, all of a sudden we have skyrocketed forward. So the model that was used in this whole space alien thing was the 200. You see it in movies with The Man That Fell to Earth with David Bowie. And here's a guy, he wants to get back home, but the technology is not advanced enough here on the planet to build something they can go home with. He needs all the various pieces of industry working together a division of labor to make all the various types of components and pieces necessary to build a rocket to go home. Now, using that model and gaming it out, if you're going to take over the planet, how do you do it? How do you manage the technology? How do you focus the endeavors and the labors to do your bidding? You have a cult that wants to take over planet Earth. And that's who we're actually fighting here on the planet. And they've gotten their players that'll do their bidding into high positions, high office, with the goal being to leave the planet. That's what Jack Parsons was working on. That's what the demons that he was communicating with, Jack Parsons being the one that the Jet Propulsion Laboratory is based off of. And they were trying to get off the planet. They were trying to get the ancient technology from the demons. What was Oppenheimer channeling when he said, I made like God, a destroyer of worlds? He's quoting the Vishnu, where in a previous era, pre-Adam, a prior time on planet Earth, a pre-Adamic period, there was 2 atomic bombs blowing up in India. We can find the isotopes there today. I've talked about that story before. So there was some earlier knowledge in a pre-human era, humanoid, not human, being children of Adam, where the earth was plowed and then reinvented. Those people that we're fighting in this current age believe that they, whether it's true or not, that they somehow, with the aid of these demon beings, in their religion, there's God, that they can get the knowledge to go out and leave this planet and go back home to Sirius. And that we're just the people that are their tools in the man who fell to earth kind of a scenario to help them to get back home. We're just useful idiots. And controlling the politics, controlling the intelligence agencies, controlling the technology to take power and hold it is critical to achieving their ends. NASA is the most occult organization in the entire U.S. government and the parallel operations around the world. So understanding what you're fighting, how would you game it out to win against an alien force, and do it covertly where they could target you personally or the people around you? And that's the game that you're watching played out. The most important component, by the way, in this whole game is the people. See, if you can get people, and it's similar to the city of Baal, you had so many humans running around and they're outnumbering you. And so how do you get them to depopulate? You get them to bring their kids and sacrifice them to stay alive. You get them to sacrifice as many as they can to survive. They self-terminate. They end their future while you are hybridizing the females and creating your own race and trying to get the numbers up to where it's a fair fight on the numbers and then take them out. And so how do you get a whole planet of people to self-terminate, to bring down the numbers in this modern era? What can you get them to do? Is it in the food supply? Is it some type of a practice that they do that gets them to fall right into your trap? And usually it's the very thing you bait them. Well, if you do this, you'll save yourself. And then what are we really fighting at the end of the day? That's one of the other questions. We're a carbon-based life form. How are we trying to augment ourselves with computers? How much of these people augmented their genius with computers already and gamed it out silicon versus carbon-based units. And imagine, for example, I don't do any social media, but in the social media, if anybody's on some channel they think is me, I don't do any social media. Over on one of the platforms, uh, we became aware of one that's using Juan O Savin. It's not me. We complained and we made the challenge to it, and asked, because there's some fan sites and like that and do stuff, and for the most part, just find they're passing stuff along. They're not, trying to pretend they're me. But here in this one, what did we find out? We'd do a little investigation. The communications hub on the other side is a chat GTP AI. So you ask it questions and it's answering as though it's me.
That's correct.
And then it has like 15,000 followers. Okay. Well, so we look at some of the followers when we're looking at behind the scenes in the analytics, and it looks like about 2/3 of them at least are bots. So they're pretending to have an audience, and that's bots answering and commenting and everything else. The site's being run by a bot. Who am I fighting? I'm fighting a silicon-based life form, right? That's mimicking me. Well, what are they trying to do to the rest of America? They're literally trying to replace you. You think it's that replacement population that's coming over the border. But the reality is, whether it's your job or your thought or your vote, you're fighting machines.
Who's creating these bot accounts though? Because I thought we had that under control, but then I have
no.
I have a TikTok account with 80,000 followers and it's not me. And I look and I think the same thing. I think, most of them, minus my actual number, which is 31,000, they're all bots. So who is doing this?
Well, in fact, that was part of the thing that when Musk got to go in and do the Twitter purchase, there was a certain thing that happened. I don't want to get into the details. It'll come out at some point when it's appropriate and like that. But there was a certain thing that was going to happen, and there was a preemptive thing that was done to try to screw with the timing. It accomplished its purpose when in the Twitterverse, they began the process to try to send out messages to all of the Twitter accounts to create a certain societal momentum concerning a certain event.
Yeah.
What was exposed that was that over half of the accounts, it was probably much more than that, but what we could prove was over half the accounts that were being used were fake accounts. Now, when Elon agreed to buy and did a buyout thing on Twitter, they had a certain number. It was based on the ad value, based on the number of accounts. But then if you realize that over half the accounts within the Twitter system were fake, but the advertisers were being charged as though they were real people, then they were being frauded.
Yeah.
And the question was, well, if it's a fake account, it's still an account in the fine print. Does it say it has to be humans, or can it be, silicon accounts? And there was the big thing, and then Elon eventually settled to do the buy at the numbers they agreed to. And by the way, part of the whole point here is just like Facebook. Facebook was a creation of DARPA, just like Bitcoin was a creation of DARPA, just like 20 other companies that are out there were created in the DARPA-verse to capture societal functions, the business of America's business. So you capture all the businesses and you run them through fake personages. Facebook was called LifeLog. It was financed with 500 million of U.S. taxpayer money, 100 million a year for 5 years. The whole project was about capturing social media control in this emerging new market of social media. It wasn't created by Zuckerberg. It wasn't created by the Winklevoss twins either. It was a DARPA operation. It closed down, and by the way, on the numbers, the LifeLog operation came to an end on February 4th, 2004 at noon.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook was incorporated at noon on February 4th, 2004. On the numbers, which I talked about previously, so everybody knows within the cults, this is us. It's a breaking the 8 number. The breaking the 8 is a very occult number going all the way back to the Egyptians, at least, and probably Babylon and before. But it's a breaking the 8 number, and the figurative symbology of the 8 is this hourglass on its side. It's the infinity sign. And in the astrology, if you take a stick and you put it in the ground and you follow the sun's shadow at high noon, from summer to fall to winter, back to summer, the shadow makes a great big huge figure 8 in the sand. If you put a dot every day at noon where the shadow falls, it makes a great big figure 8. That's the infinity sign. And in the occult, it's like the plane of the glass on a mirror, where the mirroring occurs. On this side of the mirror is our reality. On the other side is the ethereal, the spiritual. And so in the occult, they want to break that membrane that separates the spiritual side of reality from the physical side. That's the breaking the 8 spells and rituals, etc. So when you see Hollywood repeatedly in the music videos, when you see Hollywood in commercials where they have mirrors, and people have sold their soul to the devil using a wrecking ball to break the mirror between the physical world and the spiritual, to gate the demons into this world, to interact with the demons, to mate with the demons, if you will, and bring them into this world. That's what they're mimicking and symbolizing with these breaking the 8, breaking the infinitesimal point between this reality and that reality, to gate the demons through. And we see that over and over and over again. So yeah, anyway, I had some point, but I think I made it.
I've heard you say that expression, but I've never understood it. So thank you for explaining that, because I didn't know what that meant.
And hey, by the way, I know I repeat some of this stuff a lot of times with different audiences. Sometimes you'll hear something and you kind of get it, and then it's either you were distracted by something else, it wasn't the right time, you had to hear it a couple times, and then all of a sudden it clicked. And so even though a lot of the stuff, look, you go to Sunday school, you do anything in a ritualistic form, repetition's part of it in order for it to suddenly get seated. And so giving these examples in various presentations with some repetition, a little different context, you might hear it a few times and all of a sudden, I see it, I get it, I saw it in something, I saw it a day or something, and all of a sudden it has, meaning where you didn't have it before. So if it's repetitive for people, I'm sorry, but we have a lot of new people that are kind of coming out of the days right now. And so the one thing I started to say a minute ago, when we game this out on computers, how do we beat silicon-based life forms? How do we beat alien invaders? How do we beat occult? Because at the end of the day, whether it's the 200 that landed at Mount Herman, or the man that fell to Earth, just one alien idea, alien entity, or a cult of people that have an objective. On the whole, the vast population doesn't want to own the world and control the world. It's not in their hearts. It's not where they're going. So what we have to do is understand that we win on the numbers. If we're all coming alive, becoming alert with some level of coherency, we're Gulliver. They've got 1,000 little ropes and strings and stakes holding us down.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, bang, one stake's out, 10 stakes are out, and you rise up and you stand. These are Lilliputians that are trying to hold America and the world back. They've tried to suppress us from advancing in a natural form with intelligence. They're trying to control those outcomes. They're gaming out what we're doing societally and trying to work all sorts of games and scams and magic on us to keep us from seeing and understanding their plan and their path, which is to depopulate us and increase their numbers to where they so outnumber us and out control us by whatever mechanism, including silicon based entities. Right now, it's ethereal, it's in programs, it's dots and tittles on a computer screen. But if they can cause us to wipe each other enough, they can augment their numbers in the biological realm with silicon based creations that in this generation are only dots and tittles on a computer screen and in programs. And a generation or two from now are actual robots, entities, silicon-based life forms, which they own and control. And in their future, they don't die because eventually they download themselves into those silicon life forms. And someday I'll talk about the moon and I'll explain why Howard Hughes thought what he did about what was going on there. Remember, it was his team that put all the lunar landers up there in the pre-mapping missions before Apollo went there, allegedly.
Allegedly. Well, Juan, do you have any final thoughts about George Magazine or anything current right now before we part ways?
Well, I mean, I'm glad that people are out trying to do creative projects that will help the patriot community. They've allowed a number of people that are friends to get their thoughts in print. The magazine is provocative. If it's on your counter, your coffee table, and friends come over, it makes a statement. You know, I don't think that you can really probably ever do what the original did. We're in a different era now. So it's fun. Maybe they can, let's see. But the reality is that we're in a different phase of the operations right now. It's just like, how do you communicate with our tribe in this moment to push back against this elite that has captured control, not just of America, but countries around the world? The people that have given us their statements that were involved in um, the electronic side of capturing the vote 2020 and beyond. And actually, for a couple of decades prior to that, with the smartmatic systems and other evolutions of the electronic vote machines and ballot tabulation systems, things like that. These people who've given us their statements talk about the fact that how they did it, who they helped. And even during the course of this year, over the next many months, it's going to be almost impossible for any reasonable person to hear what they're going to hear and still stick with this idea that the 2020 or 2022 votes were honest and valid, no fraud, and that Biden won. It's going to be almost impossible for any reasonable person. Let's see if I'm right or not. I will be. We got it all. With that in mind, anybody that's trying to get those messages out and communicate along those lines, more power to them. But we are in a different era. For this generation, for example, one of the more controversial things, the PSYOP of Q and the Q operation. Was that just an individual or a couple individuals trying to mess with the psyches of the American people with, some PSYOP? Let me just tell you that over time, you will get greater and greater and greater understanding of the complexity of what was done there. The anticipation of what would happen at various steps, and anticipating and then programming into the public consciousness certain areas that had to be focused on, and timing for those events to occur, that will make it impossible for any real rational person to conclude that this was done with anything short of nation state level utilities and assets to game this out, to have had a plan. Even within the various PSYOPs that are PSYOPs against us, let's use the shot, where we're supposed to self-terminate. That was a massive PSYOP that had been being prepped going all the way back into the 60s, even the 50s in some aspects, by these globalista to create a context where we would begin to self-terminate. The eugenics would be, euthanasia would be done by ourselves. And that didn't just happen overnight. To fight that, you had to bring the people along. You couldn't just have, for example, let's say that Trump magically, miraculously signed an insurrection act that was created by Sidney Powell, because there's no document sitting on the shelf. You have to create one that mimics what happened with Lincoln. What did Lincoln get when he signed the Insurrection Act? He got a civil war. It divided America. What was Nixon worried about? Civil war in America. So you couldn't just come back at the people that were attacking him. You had to come up with a plan that had a prayer. In the meantime, you had to buy time. You had to give a threat to them that was adequate, that they wanted to go there, but if they did, it was like playing chicken. I remember a couple of folks playing chicken in a 59 Chevy station wagon, two-door, and a 57 T-Bird. And here they are going 70 or 80 miles an hour playing chicken. Who's going to blink first? And if neither of them blinks, they're both dead.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't have airbags in those days, okay? In what's going on in the world right now, Nixon essentially basically said, you want to play chicken? I'm throwing a 59 Chevy station wagon at you at 70, 80, 90 miles an hour. Pedal to the metal. I will give it all out. What's the wealth for a lot of these people? It's the energy. The world turns and spins and operates. All the gears and wheels, everything in society, in modern society, is about energy. If you take out the ability for them to own the controls and choke points, you take them all out. That was part of the genius of the Houston Project, bypassing the intelligence agencies and Nixon getting direct intelligence without going through the CIA or FBI. And so if you take that out, that control node, that point of contact, where all of the finances, all of the currency goes through the energy choke point, you shut the world down. You think it's going to be great for the world? No. What ends up happening is you lose taxation and government control through that. You lose a control point for the banking and the financing and everything else. What Tesla envisioned was that he gives away the energy, the power for free. Then you pay for the instruments that tap that power, all of the inventions, the devices, the machinery. And that's where you make your money. But no one entity or group can turn the spigot on or off. So you're very independent. You don't want to buy somebody else's tool, make your own. But the energy itself is free. Nixon proposed that we'll blow you all up. What has Trump intoned all the way along? We have a way to blow up their choke point of the flow of energy. Do we do the transition instantaneously? No, because you still have to have the instruments, the machinery that can utilize energy given in that way. But the world system, the way it is, it blows it up. So that's the threat. Who's going to blink? Do you want to go to total destruction, or are we going to work our way through this? And it's like what happened with the drug lords down in South America. When the time came to stop the drug running into America and to close it down, they had a choice. Take your winnings and leave the table. You want to keep doing it? We're going to wipe you out. Only 2 of them decided to take the money and walk away from the table. The rest all got wiped out. So that's the situation right now. You want to stay at the table? You want to do stuff? We're going to do it this way. And in getting the information out to the people so they could begin to think differently, you couldn't teach the old dogs new tricks, really. So the place you really had to start, even though there's some older ones that would figure it out and spent time there and gamed it out because it was aimed at gaming within the Q project, was primarily aimed at young people, young gamers, solving a puzzle, solving a riddle. Riddle me this. And as they learned how to go in and research and solve the puzzle, to understand the algorithms that were in place and who the mechanisms were, and they got it in their hearts, it was embedded in them, written in them, so that as they get older, and now, they were teens, they were early 20s. They were just coming out of the gaming world because they had to get a job 9 to 5, and they just got a kid. And the second one's on the way now. Remember, it's been 7 years since that project was initiated. And now they know how to do it, but you want what you can't have. The game's been stopped. And now you had to watch the way the world works and how these people would govern if they were allowed to be in power that were opposing. And it's like letting go of the rope in tug of war. Now you see what they're doing, but they're falling in the dirt. You see who they really are. It's just about time now where we pick the rope back up. And you're seeing it even in the Trump cases. Within the next 30 days, all the cases against Trump will be neutral or dead in the water, over with. Even the current one in New York, I believe, with filings that happen starting this Friday, and other ones coming from other states even now, and even the Speaker of the House, who has been, not exactly super helpful to Trump, but suddenly shows up at the New York courthouse because he sees which way it's going.
Right.
Sees that it's about to get shut down, and he wants to be on the right side as that happens. And a lot of other people that were neutral on Trump, they see him as the Magador coming out, killing the deep state bull.
Yeah.
which is the theme that, I've been presenting for the last couple of years. We've got some fun stuff related to that over at Jennifer's shop, the jennifermac.com, and then over at All Patriots at gumroad.com, where my books are at. But there's the Megador theme. Not Trump as the Matador, Trump as the Megador. And what he's doing is killing the deep state bull. As you see him rise to victory in these arenas of the courthouses, and all of his opponents being wiped out, put dead in the water in their own confusion, and then even Biden supposedly going to debate Trump as if the wet noodle stood a chance. We'll have a war, earthquake, something before that comes off. If it does, is it going to be the real Biden, or which one of his fill-ins is going to take the spot? He's suddenly going to get smart and be able to articulate things again.
Yeah.
Right. So at the end of the day, this whole game now is turning again, and those people that understood and were focused on learning how to do their own research, to look behind the curtains, to not take the Mockingbird media's statements unchallenged, to see the string pullers from behind the curtain.
Right.
And even, I will add, one of the most important aspects that's the least understood, even within the community of the Q operation, America's foundations aren't just the Constitution. America's foundation is the Pilgrims. America's foundation is its covenant with God Almighty by the Pilgrims, who were the real founders of the country. And those that came in and tried to legislate and articulate and pull together these states in a union, these constitutionalists, were actually the follow-on to an earlier project with the Pilgrims that was based in a belief that the foundations of a free society, of society at all, human to human, had to be anchored in the Ten Commandments, in Judeo-Christian beliefs, which allowed freedom of religion. You can't have free worship of God in a communist society. They have to decide the terms that you get to gather together, because that's a threat.
Right.
To do anything, including worship God, because the government's supposed to be God. The Silicon life forms tell you what you say and can't say when you're talking to each other. They have to be the high priest of conversation. That's what YouTube wants to be. That's what these other social media platforms want to be. They want to be the priests in the temple of society, deciding what's okay to talk about and what isn't, because religions are the most, you have to do this way to be accepted. You have to wear a robe this way. You have to, show up at a particular time. You have to light the candle or the lamp a certain way.
Mhm.
And so in breaking that, to getting back to people being able to do it on their own and not being run by a government, you have to have a free society. That's why the Pilgrims left Europe, with all these bloodline royals running the countries and owning everything.
Mhm.
What do you think we have in America? Who do you think these bloodline families are that Bill Clinton was praising, that Carol Quigley was identifying? Bloodline families running the country covertly behind the scenes. That's the same fight we're in now that the Pilgrims were when they left Europe.
Right.
What's the foundation of the country? It's a religious understanding of what the bases are for worship of God. So that's why within the Q operation, I had to get a little drink there. Within the Q operation, you will see scriptures quoted regularly. We battle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers of darkness based in silicon bodies.
Hmm.
I mean, in high places.
Yeah. Right.
What I'm saying, the Q operation was about training up a generation how to do their own research and what the anchors of society are and correct interaction. And then they have to stew on it a bit. You have to matriculate. You have to chew on the cud of it. You have to think about what you've learned. And you do that looking at what's happened in society since the communication stopped. When somebody continues talking, you don't get a chance to then go back and think about what they said. So when we end our conversation tonight and people have time to kind of reminisce about it and think it through, now they can kind of do some comparative analysis. They can look at the way things have happened and see, what their place is, what their role is, how they want to attack or hide from what's coming. In the Q operation, that silence of the last few years has allowed them to look at their life, look at the leaders, look at who's doing what, look at who's, held their ground in a certain way and who have chosen a side a different way. Everybody's had a chance to start picking a side.
Mhm.
And now the game is about to restart. But it will be different, just as this generation is a different generation than when George came out in the first place. The things that'll work now aren't the things that worked 25 years ago and 30 years ago. It will be a different battlefield, a different look. And so now you have the information that helped within the Q operation to get people to think differently. Now you're going to have to apply that against the silicon life forms that we're actually fighting within the computer simulated world, the communications controlled world, the media operations. Do you want your life and your children's life and your future run based on the values of algorithms in a computer chip? Or do you want it based on biologicals, person to person? The way we win is person to person. How do you break their programming? How do you break their algorithms? You do it with the unpredictability of biology and humans. We work together human to human, and we don't let a machine come between our conversations, or a machine backed by some other human augmented by machine decide what we're allowed to say and what we're not allowed to say moving forward. We're not going to be choked back by YouTube, Twitter, X, or any of the rest of them, and other places around the world, other systems around the world. They're DARPA operations disguised as individuals, who invented everything.
It certainly
Is that
seems we're getting
working for me?
close.
Am I saying it the right way?
Yeah, it certainly seems like we're getting very close to some sort of resolution because, and I feel like the people who are still engaging in this nefarious behavior, their days are numbered. It feels like it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I could be wrong, but there's this feeling like something's gotta give here soon.
No. It's so there was a certain event that happened decades and decades ago, and I don't talk about it publicly, but um, in that time frame, the TV show Miami Vice was going, and it was like somebody was channeling what had just happened. And it was the first time I remember watching the episode, and I was in my office where I had a couch. that I could recline on at times. I was exhausted, and occasionally I'd get to see Miami Vice. And I probably at that time maybe had seen a half dozen episodes ever, just because I wasn't places where I'd have a TV or be able to watch it. And they had the episode with the Phil Collins song, I Can Feel It Coming in the Night.
Mhm.
And I had at that time, I had a very rare, super exotic black car that was just, the paint was world champion, amazing, beautiful paint. And in that episode, he was, Don Johnson was driving the black Ferrari Daytona Spider convertible that they used. And they played the Phil Collins song in the course of this ongoing scene with the uh, betrayal by this partner, and everything that came with it, including death. And so it was just very gripping for me. It's almost become a mantra over all these years. Uh, and there's Phil Collins does one of his last concerts where he's walking up on the stage, and the blue lights are going, and he plays the drums. He does this amazing job. But he plays I Feel It Coming in the Night. And periodically, I sent it out the other day to a bunch of friends. We're at that moment. I can feel it in the air. It's primal, because we're about to take all these monsters out. It won't be what's coming. And I want to just help everybody with one last little thing here that everybody needs to have in mind. This isn't over once and done in a day or two. Rome wasn't built in a day. We're not taking this whole thing down in a day. Once, and the tide actually already turned. It turned last year in October, November on the numbers. But like there's a slack moment in the tide before it starts to come back. We're right at that period as these Trump cases get shut down. And then the charge is on. Last round in the bullfight. The 5-minute horn sounds, the fourth horn in a bullfight. We're about to see amazing things happen. And then the other players taken out one by one as we work towards getting the country back on the right track. But you're not going to do it in a day. You don't solve all the problems of our very complex advanced society in a day. In fact, the whole point is to maintain steerage, a certain hull speed for the ship of state, while we fight through, because we win by bringing the population with us. Where we go one, we go all. If we were to have civil war and our numbers drop down, the other side wins because we go into confusion, we wipe each other out.
Mhm.
That's what our enemies do. They're going to wipe each other out themselves. That's what's happening in these court cases. They dug a pit for us, but they themselves will fall into it and be destroyed. But that process, even Trump has said, it's about 4 years to get back to a proper election process in America
Mhm.
moving forward. I don't believe we have the election on time this year. There's a lot of dramas that have to happen. And the things that, future proofs past. Even statements like, enjoy the show, uh, get the popcorn out. It's not that we're lighthearted about all the horrors that have happened in this intervening period, but you do have to have a certain mash humor about the fact that they intended to see us groveling and destroying each other, and they themselves will die by their own sword. This is a hell of a fight, but you'll have something to tell your kids and grandkids if you're on the right side. You got to pick a lane, be on the right side of history. This is an epic moment. I think all of your listeners are in that vein on the right side. We're going to see something amazing in our lifetime. We're going to get to be a part of it. We're going to be the ones that get to tell the great stories to our kids. This group are the Pilgrims. They're the Jeffersons, the Adams, the George Washington generation of this era. And it's going to be amazing to see. And by the way, all those patriots out there putting their best in it from where their position is, what God's called them to do, just like you're all my heroes. when I think of heroes, I don't think of cartoons and caricatures and Hollywood. I think of people that went out in the real world, did amazing, seemingly impossible things by the hand of God. And to see justice in America, once again, this ideal America that has always been the dream and is still the dream and is our goal, that city on the hill that Reagan spoke about. We seek to bring that to pass, and fights on. Enjoy the show.
I love it. I can't think of a better way to end the show than that right there.
Before we close, let me just say a quick prayer with your folks. Father God, for each person here in this audience, you have a particular way that they play a part within the fabric of history, of American history. And we know that even those pilgrims and those founding fathers, people that put it all on the line, thousands, millions even, of people whose sacrifice won't be known in this world, only in the next, who gave it all, gave everything to have this country be in existence, to give an opportunity for life. I pray that you would give each one of these people here the supplies they need, the provisions, the intelligence, the knowledge, the insights to do their role, play their part at this moment from wherever they're at. And even if to the world around them it looks minor, you know that without each and every one of those people present, the perfect outcome that you have designed that is there for us would not happen if each one doesn't show up and do their part from their station in life. I pray that you would give them the heart, the perseverance, the inner girding in their heart and soul to do their job right where they're at, according to what you've given them by your grace, to invest it in America so that they and their offspring can enjoy the beauty, the fullness of the promise of a just nation doing just the things that you designed us for according to your will, so that we can not only bring peace here in America, but once having achieved that here, also go out into the rest of the world around us, including places that people under our name in our authority as a nation have done horrors and evils, that you would empower, that you would guide and strengthen and make a pathway for the people here in this audience to go out and help our brothers and sisters around the world, not to be their keeper, but to be their brother and sister, and to help them to achieve freedom and the wholeness of your blessing according to your will, Father God. I pray that you would make that happen in each heart and soul here. You would speak to them personally with that and show them your plan for them and put a desire in their heart individually from where they're at to seek your way, your will, your genius to make it happen, even where it doesn't seem possible moving forward. We thank you for letting us live in this moment in history, to be part of this moment in the retaking of the helm of the ship of state of America. By your hand, by your blessing, make it so. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks again, Juan, and I hope to see you soon.
Yeah. I'll be back in the States, not for a few weeks yet, but I'll be back shortly. Love my country.
We know you do. We know you do. You've proven it time and time again.
One of the things is that I don't want to upstage. There's plenty of people doing amazing things. I just feel very fortunate to even get to be in some circles at certain points and do my part. There's certainly a lot of people doing amazing heavy lifting, and I'm very humbled to even be able to rub shoulders with so many of these people that are just doing amazing things to save the world. And even with what you're doing with the show, even with all the people in your audience, this is a team effort. And if we don't all show up, a lot of things don't happen. They don't happen right. They don't happen the best. So I'm very glad to get to even, talk with the rest of the team a little bit. And we're going to get through this together. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll have plenty of time to, yuck it up on the far side of what's coming.
We can't wait.
Okay.
Thanks, Juan.
All right. Night.
I want to thank Juan O Savin one more time for joining me today for my 107th episode of the George Collection. I hope you all enjoyed. I have another very, very special guest coming soon, so if you haven't subscribed, please do so. And as always, thank you so much for your support. Thank you for watching. I hope you all have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
Of this extraordinary magazine, George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, actually taking cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.